Okay, I have tried making this video 10 times tonight. It's taking way too long. So now I'm just going to go right through, and I don't care if I make a mistake or not. I'm just going to blow through this. This is a video about the grade node inside of Nuke. And the reason why I'm making this video is because when I was first starting to learn and use Nuke, I found the grade node to be not intuitive at all. And I found it difficult to get into and difficult to learn. So this is really intended for junior compositors, people that are just getting into compositing. It's not really intended for senior compers. So if you're a senior comper, there's nothing new for you here. You know all this stuff already. But if you're new to Nuke, then you might get something out of this. I am going to make some edits to this if I really screw up and I really stumble over my words. So if we look at my Nuke setup now, it starts with a ramp node. And the reason why I'm using the ramp node is because it's very simple, very straightforward. We're just going from 0 to 1. So when I'm learning a new tool, I like to keep things really simple and not have anything too complicated right off the bat so that I get a good feel for how the tool works. Underneath that, I have the grade node, and then I haven't made any changes or anything to it. And then after that, I have the slice tool. The slice tool, the way that this works is it draws a line from left to right, and it is kind of reporting on the color, the brightness values of my image. So over on the left-hand side, my image has a value of 0. So you can see this graph, there's the value of 0. Then we have a gradient that gradually goes up. So here's my gradient going up. And then at the very end, I have a value of 1. And so that's this part over here. So if I go to my grade node and I go to the gamma and I make some changes to it, if I make it darker or brighter, you can see that these changes are reflected in this graph. The slice tool doesn't come built in with Nuke. This is something that I downloaded from Nukepedia. And I first saw it in this book called Digital Compositing for Film and Video. And in that book, there's a lot of diagrams about how color correction works. The author, Steve Wright, uses something very similar here, and I found it very helpful when I was learning about color corrections. If I look at the grade node, I'm going to start with the black point. And if I hover over top of the black point, you can see the tooltip that comes up. It says this color is turned into black. What that means is if I sample a pixel, and when I say sample, if you just hit Control, that's going to create this little sample box over here, and it'll tell you what the values are in red, green, and blue. So it says right there that my color value for this pixel is 0.20841. So if I go to my black point and I type in 0.20841, then now that pixel it'll be black. There's like 0.7 zeros and then 0.000057. Like it's virtually 0. So any color that I put into here, into this dialog box, that is going to become my new black point. That is going to be at 0. Now notice that clamp black is turned on. So even the color values that are over here, even if I had something that was even originally a little bit darker, that is going to be flattened out to be flat black. If this is turned off, then notice that it keeps going down. It doesn't stop at 0. And if I sample some of the pixels over here, you can see that some of the values go into negative. And you usually don't want your color values to go into negative values. Sometimes that can really be very confusing when you're working. So clamp black is turned on, and it's usually a good idea to have that on. I'll bring that back to 0, and then the same thing for the white point. If I hover over top of the white point, it says this color is turned into white. So if I come over here, and this pixel has a value of 0.72, so if I say my white point instead of 1 is going to be set to 0.72813, then you can see that now those pixel values have a value of 1. And for lift, if I go here and if I sample the pixel value here, that has my blacks are at 0. If I go to lift and I look at the tooltip for that, it says black is turned into this color. So right now my sampler is at 0 and it's in the blacks. If I go here to lift and I say 0.1, then now that has lifted up my blacks. It's added 0.1 to my blacks. And if I go here and if I kind of bring that up, you can see how that is affecting the image. It doesn't just bring up, just the blacks, it's bringing up everything, but primarily it's starting with like the black levels, and everything else gets affected a little bit, but it gets less affected as it gets closer to 1. If I go to gain, if I hover over top of that and I look at what does that say, it says white is turned into this color. So what that means is if I have a value of 1 over here, if I go and I bring that down to 0.52, then now my white, they now have a value of 0.52. Or if I go here and I increase that to 1.8, then now the pixels that were at 1, we're at just regular white, they're brighter than white now. They're at 1.8. So whatever I put in here. When you're working with this, try to think that black point and lift can kind of work together because they're both dealing with the black point. And white point and gain, that they both are controlling where your white point is ultimately going to be at. After that, we have multiply, offset, and gamma. So if I look at multiply over here, then multiply and gain are actually the same thing. It's actually multiplying the image. And this is something that when I first was learning about compositing, this took me like years to really understand, which is embarrassing to say, but it's kind of true. What gain and multiply do is they literally multiply the numbers of the brightness values in your image. So what took me a really long time to learn when I was first compositing is these numbers here, okay, I'll tell you a little story. When I was first learning compositing, I was working and there was this really experienced compositor. This was maybe in the first year when I was, learning how to composite. And he looked at me and he was like, Joe, he could tell I was struggling. I was really not doing very well. And he looked at me and he said, Joe, compositing is visual math. And he said, as soon as you understand that compositing is visual math, the more all this stuff is going to make sense to you. And that was not very comforting to me. I think he was trying to be nice, but I was not very good at math. And so when he told me that, it actually, it got me scared. But what I came to realize was that if you understand add, subtract, multiply, and divide, and invert, then that's going to go like a long way for understanding just the basic operations of compositing. So if I come here and if I look at like these color values, it's set to like 0.5. Well, if I say multiply that by 2, 0.5 times 2 equals 1. So if I go here and I multiply that by 2, then now the color value for that pixel was at 1. If I multiply it by 1, which is the default here, it just stays the same. And if I go to multiply and I set that to 0.5, well, 0.5 times 0.5, something that I ask my students, I'll say 0.5 times 0.5, quick, is that a bigger number or a smaller number? And people will say, after a second or two, they'll say, well, that's a smaller number. And yeah, 0.5 times 0.5 equals 0.25. But you also have to think, okay, now how does that translate to the image? Well, if a pixel was at 0.5, now it's at 0.25, it's going to be darker. Okay, so if I go here and if I say, if my original pixel was at 0.5 and I multiply it by 0.5, now when I look at it, now that pixel will be at 0.25. And again, if you're a senior compositor and you're watching this, yes, it's like, yes, this is very obvious. But for me, when I was first learning about this, when I understood that, it was like doors opened up. A lot of things now just made sense. Where before I would just be kind of using the sliders and moving them back and forth and not really understanding. This unlocked like a lot of what compositing is for me, and I just understood things a lot more. So gain works the same way. If I go to here to gain, and if I set that to 0.25, or sorry, 0.5, is what I was saying before. So I set this to 0.5, then now the value here is 0.25. It's doing the exact same thing. It's multiplying the image. So yeah. So anyways, so you have gain, you have multiply, offset. What offset is it is adding to the image. So if I go to offset and I go up here, you can see how that is affecting the image. And if you look at the graph, so what that means is if I go over here to 0 and I look at that, okay, so 0, and if I go to offset, if I say 0.5, that's going to add 0.5 to the original image. So this is now at 0.5. But if I come over here to where before this was at 1, now it's at 1.5. Okay, so I'm adding 0.5 to the entire image like that. Gamma is a power operation. And to be honest, I don't know the math for that one. There is a math formula for it. The main thing that I look at for gamma is that it affects the midtones, where things that are at flat 0 or at 1, it won't get affected by it. So you can really crank these values like crazy, and you can see that over here 0 and 1, they don't move. So gamma is usually the midtones. Thing to keep in mind though, notice though that it really does affect the shadows. To me, it feels like it's affecting the shadows a lot more than how it's affecting the highlights. Okay, so whenever I use gamma, I do know, I try to keep in mind, okay, it's not affecting 0, but it is affecting the shadows, in a pretty powerful way. The other thing to keep in mind when it comes to gamma, and God, this is taking way too long, but if you affect the gamma here, if you have values that go above 1, then before, this line would have been going up in a straight line. It would have been going straight up like this, and would have kept on going up in that direction. But if I were to go like this, well, now it's not going to go straight up like it was before. It's going to go in this direction. Maybe I'll draw. I don't know if I can draw something on the screen. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is you have to be a little bit careful when you use gamma, especially if you have values that go above 1. Okay, so hopefully just by going over this kind of makes a little bit of sense with what these do, but how can we apply this in a practical way? So I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to bring in an image, just a really quick example, and then we might look at comping some CG. So give me a second. Okay, so I have this image over here, and let's say they ask me to color correct this to remove the blue tint, which no one has ever asked me to do as a compositor. You're always matching to the background, but as a exercise, let's just say you had to do that. If I look at this cat, I'm going to assume that this cat's fur is white. So if I make a grade node here, and I go to my white point, and I go here, and sorry, not here. If I go to the little color swatch, if I click on that, I can use the eyedropper, and then I can actually sample a color. So if I go here and I hold down Control and I click, now notice that in Nuke's viewer, it's kind of doing this flickering thing. If you hold down Control and Alt, it won't do that. And if I want to take a range, if I want to take an average of the pixels, not just one specific pixel, if I hold down Control, Shift, and Alt and click and drag, then it won't flicker. That flickering, if you sample like this and you see this flashing image, that's just because it's actually sampling the screen, and then when the color is updating, it samples that. It's sampling stuff really, really fast. So if you hold down Alt, it won't do that. Okay, so now I'm saying, okay, well, this is white. And by doing that, it's compensating and it's color correcting the image, and I've just very quickly and easily removed that color cast that was on the original image. And if this is a bit blown out, maybe that's a bit too bright, I can go to my multiplier, I can go to my gain and bring that down a little bit so that white isn't so blindingly bright. Okay, so yeah, so just a really quick example of using and setting our white point in this case. Usually, the main thing is you start by setting your black point. But in this case, just to show you, I had something here that was white, so I just used the white point to clean this up. So for a little bit more of a more practical example of what you do as a compositor, you're just, as you're compositing your CG over a background, that'll be the next example. So one sec. Okay, so I have this image over here. This is from Action VFX. You can download this footage for free. And I just did a very bad render. Purposely, I overlit it. And let's say I have to take this and I need to kind of match it more closely to the background over here. So there's a few different ways that you can approach this, but what I would do, normally the way that I would go about doing this, is if I drop down a grade node, I use the black point and the white point to set my, to kind of take this image and put it between a known 0 and 1. So if I go to my white point, I'm going to go to the eyedropper and I might sample like this area over here and set that so that now this is my white point. And then I go to my black point and I try to find, ideally you would be able to perfectly find the darkest part of your image, which you usually can't. So you might end up kind of, because the clamp black is on, you might end up clamping some values. But I'm going to go here. I'm just going to start by going like that. I'll show you another way in a minute. So now I have something like this. Now, this still looks like way too contrasty if you compare it to the background over here. But now I can go to my lift. So this is going to be for my black point. Because remember, lift is going to be that black is going to turn into this color. So I'm going to take my black that I have here and I'm going to match it maybe to the black that's over here. So if I hit down Control and Shift, I'm going to just sample that. Oh, I forgot. You have to, if I'm lifting up my blacks, I have to turn on Unpremultiply by the alpha channel. Now this video is already getting too long, so I'm not going to explain this right now, but I might make another video in the future that explains unpremultiplication and premultiplication and all that stuff. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to sample this. And by doing that, now the shadows that like the blacks that I had here should now match the blacks that I have over here. And the whites, if I look, there's like something over here that's in white. Like this is white, it's kind of like in shadow though. So it's getting like a blue tint to it. So I could say, okay, well, I'm going to take my gain, which is my white over here. And then I could say, well, I want that white to match this. So now if I grab that, then now the whites over here should now be hopefully like really close to this. Now it's not sitting in this shot very well still. Again, this is more like my bad lighting than anything else. Now the next thing would be you have to try to match the contrast ratio. And this is way off. Just the lighting is really bad on this CG. If you look at like this pole back here, it doesn't go into like super dark shadow. There's like a little bit of a highlight here, but then it's not really that dark. So you can try to like, I think no matter what I do, I won't be able to, the lighting just has to be done better. But I could try to go to my gamma and try to, reduce maybe some of the dark shadow. Like it's still in pretty dark shadows here. But what I'm trying to show is I often would use this technique here to get started, to get it so that at least it's roughly in the right world, so that it's close. And then from there, I can use the multiply, the offset, and the gamma to do further color correction adjustments. Now, before I finish, there is a really nice set of tutorials by Josh Parks. I think the Foundry have those videos on their YouTube channel, and I'll post a link to it in the description. And I might just show a picture of it here. He has a really nice technique, and I would say like that's a really good video to watch, because what he does is it's more along the lines of he doesn't really use for the black point. He doesn't go into that, what I've just did here, because I think he was saying that he doesn't like that you might accidentally clamp some of the black values. So what he does, he's really concerned about the contrast between them, and he uses another node called toe. And I'll just show you that really quickly. If I go back over here and I look at my slice tool, and I just get rid of the grade node, there is a node. If I use the grade node, you can see that if I go to offset, if I go here, or not offset, if I go to lift, it really affects the entire image pretty dramatically. Yes, it does lift up the blacks, but it's lifting up like all this other stuff here as well. So what Josh recommends is using the toe node. So what toe does is, if I go here, I think it does the same thing. It's still lifting this up, but there's a very nice fall off on it where I can lift up the shadows, but it doesn't really lift up the other stuff here as well. So a lot of the stuff here stays pretty much the same. We don't kind of wreck the rest of our image, but we're affecting really just the blacks. I really like this, and after I watched Josh's video, I started incorporating this tool in my color corrections more and more. So if I was looking at this over here, and if I was to take another crack at it, I might do the grade node to set my white values. So I might go here to my grade, and I might go here to, maybe I'll set my white point over here like this, maybe something, set those whites. And then I can go to gain, and let me just set the unpremultiplied alpha. I'll explain this later, but this video is already too long. I think everybody's gone by now. And if I go to gain, I'll go here and I'll grab that. And then for the shadows, if I want to affect those, I could drop down the toe after this. And again, I have to turn on unpremultiply by the alpha. And then I can go over here and then I can start to lift this up, and you can see how that's affecting the shadows without really affecting the other parts of the image. So it's kind of nice. It's kind of nice. It's a different way of approaching it that I didn't really think about until a few years ago when I saw Josh's tutorial, Josh's tutorial. So I think that's it. The only other thing I'll show is that the grade node has a very nice reverse button over here. So that means that if I make a color correction here, and then let's say I copy and paste this node, and if I click reverse on it, it'll go back to the way it was, which is really nice, because sometimes to do that manually, it'd be really tricky to figure out the math to do it all. So this reverse node will kind of undo the changes that you did to it, which is really nice. Okay, that's it.